All right. Let's see, can you guys hear me? All right, testing. I don't see the audio jumping, so we'll have to see in a couple seconds here. What's up, Tempest or Patriot? Can you hear me? Nice. Okay. Awesome. I guess it's I don't know why it says that well, at least it looks like I'm not inputting any audio, but if you guys can hear me, then thank you. Um, all right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mr. 2A live stream. It's been a minute, hasn't it? Had a lot of stuff going on, and I've actually got some notes, been doing some homework on this. But just as a quick catch up, I do apologize for the lack of content. Things have been, to say things have been wildly busy over the past several months would be an understatement. Recently got hired by a city out here as a firefighter EMT. Got about a month until the fire academy starts. So been working towards that and everything else that has entailed. And there's a bunch of other things that have been going on. But moving to the point, first of all, thank you all for watching my videos and being here tonight. And for those of you who are not live, thank you for watching this later, at least being interested. Tonight, of course, we're talking about the recent ATF rule change on pistol braces or stabilizing braces. So getting to the notes, I guess, first of all, the disclaimer is, as many of you know, I am not a lawyer. So everything or anything that I say in this video or have said or will say is not to be construed with competent legal advice. This is all opinions, ideas, theories, feedback, speculation. And for YouTube purposes, this is all entertainment. So everything that is going to be said or any opinions or things I have is not competent legal advice. Just to get that out of the way. The next thing is, I'm sure most people who are watching or will watch this later, you guys understand that this is a very fluid situation, as we've seen from the ATF. We're going to get into this. There's kind of an ebb and flow of things. There's things they would like to do and they try to enact, and then it goes away or gets shut down. And this particular situation is going to be ongoing, and it's a very fluid, moving situation. So right here, January 16th, 2023, on this live stream, anything we talk about, it may not necessarily be relevant even just a week later. So I think we all understand that, but just saying it. Also, this recent ruling, which, or at least rule change, it is over 290 pages. So there's a lot to dissect there. Again, I'm not a lawyer. We're not going to be going over all the dry 290 plus pages of this. We would have to be here all night and until tomorrow. We're not going to do that. Trying to get to the theme of what's happening, questions that we're going to talk about is what is going on. When is this supposed to take effect? What are we to do in the meantime? What are some future things to think about? So, the last thing is, and I see a lot of, especially pro Second Amendment gun lawyers or attorneys getting flack for this. We are going to be talking about what this allegedly is supposed to do. That does not mean that I support it, because I'll tell you right now, I don't. That does not mean just talking about it and what the deal is and what's supposed to happen does not mean that I agree with it. It just means we're talking about what this, it's not proposed rule change, it's a rule change. And we're going to get into when it takes effect and everything else. So that's kind of the disclaimer. Just me talking about what this thing says does not mean that I agree with it. I'm not happy with it. We're just talking about it. So real quick before I keep moving, put on my glasses here. Let's see. Sound is perfect from Ordinary American. Yes, I'm back for now. Thank you. Re-listen later. Unrelated question. Any chance you could repost the lower receiver assembly video here on Rumble? So what Ordinary American is talking about, for those who don't know. So I did actually, it wasn't just one, it was a series of videos about properly assembling an AR-15 lower receiver. Now, granted, we were not manufacturing a firearm. It was an already 100% through background check, 4473, everything else. It was 100% lower, and we just had parts, and we were putting all the parts together. And I guess, I was using Arrow AR-15s, later an M5 AR-10 variety lower for a series of videos I did. And I found out through our distributors and through Arrow that they were recommending even my videos on customer support, on customers building their product. YouTube deleted those videos, and I'm not sure how, but I managed to escape without a strike. So still have those videos, and probably on an alternative platform, I can re-upload them. But, YouTube considered that manufacturing a firearm or, something of that nature, and it just wasn't. But just to avoid strikes and try to leap on to other platforms, which I haven't done yet, that's kind of the backstory on that. So hard times to be a YouTuber who focuses on Second Amendment issues, firearms with lawful, law-abiding citizens, and just how do we do this in the modern era? Hard times. But moving beyond that, let's see, one last thing, and I'll keep moving. From old school Tempest, but Patriot these days. I'm hoping the lawsuits get going soon. We're going to talk about that. I know the court system is slow, but the ATF shouldn't be able to do this. We're also going to talk about that. So I'm going to leave that, but trust me, we're going to talk about that. So first of all, for people here or who will see this later who don't understand what a stabilizing brace is. So first of all, just kind of going through, and a lot of this moves into the 1934 National Firearms Act, what we call the NFA, where there are definitions as to what a pistol is, what a rifle is, what a shotgun is, and then you have these other categories, which we're about to talk about. But starting off with pistols. So this here, it's one of my home defense guns. It happens to be a Glock 34 Gen 5, Aimpoint Acro P2, X300, 19 rounders. This, I think most, whether you don't own any guns or you own just a couple guns, you're not really in the weeds on this. I think most people would consider this a pistol, and legally, this is a pistol. How about something like this? This is a Beretta 92F, actually one I happened to take to Iraq. But this is, I think most people would also look at this and consider this a pistol. This is also, this is your gun on government. This is also legally defined as of now, and we're going to talk about it in the next 120 something days. This is a pistol. It's a 5.56 millimeter, 10.5-inch barrel with a stabilizing brace. But this is also defined as a pistol. And now we move to rifles, at least visual demonstration. This does have a actual 16.1 inch barrel. This has a Magpul MOE stock, and observe the surface area, which seems to be kind of a thing with this recent rule change, obsession over surface area. But this is meant to be two-handed, and this is meant to go in your shoulder to further stabilize with two hands something that has a barrel of 16 inches or greater. This is a rifle. And just to demonstrate other varieties, this is also a rifle. This is a 14.5-inch barrel, but it has a permanently pinned and welded dead air flash hider on here. So we do have an actual stock with a overall barrel length, at least what the ATF legally would consider a 16+ inch permanent attachment to the barrel. This is now part of the barrel. So for those who know guns and are aware of the law, you're going to know what I'm talking about. But for those who are unaware, I'll just bring that back. These two are legally pistols. Yes, handguns. We're going to get to that. So, what is a stabilizing brace, for those who don't know? So, this is kind of a trip down memory lane, at least for me. Over a decade ago, and for those who have been watching my videos for a while, you guys have seen Range Chris, one of my co-hosts, and we used to work at Oak Tree Gun Club in Newhall, California, of all places, and that was over a decade ago. And back in those days, before the actual braces came out, the history of AR pistols or AK pistols, a lot of them Dracos, things like that, it was basically a rifle design and cartridge, but with a really short barrel and no stock. So it was not what's called a registered SBR or a short barrel rifle. And back in those days, at least for AR pistols, it was like a broom handle buffer tube assembly, for those who don't know. At least for your AR-15 design. This is a necessary part of the back end of your firearm because it has your buffer and action spring that is needed to actually function the gun, which is also important, at least something they mention in this rule. So this is a 6-position adjustable buffer tube, and it can accept either a stock, or in this case, not a stock, a brace. This is the SBA3 adjustable brace. But back in those days, before anything came out, you didn't have the adjustability. You just had like this broom handle buffer tube. Sometimes it had foam or paracord on it, just because the gun needs it to function if it's an AR-15. But it wasn't really comfortable. Frankly, it wasn't really practical. But at the time, I just kind of saw them as range toys or something interesting to have. It just practically didn't seem to make sense. And then around 2012, we had the first iteration of the braces coming out. Now the braces, the stabilizing braces, were designed, I'll demonstrate. But the stabilizing braces were designed with wounded warriors, people with disabilities, strength limitations, to be able to take their pistol and actually shoot it as defined by the law, a firearm that's intended to be fired with one hand, and to do it safely and more effectively, especially for those who had physical limitations or disabilities. But the idea was that you take this Velcro strap and just trying to do this, but you strap it to your forearm. And of course, later on, different designs came where we're all different. We got different lengths of pole, different size forearms, but you strap this to your forearm, and now you could shoot your pistol, which is lawfully defined as a pistol, in a legal manner, in a safer manner, something you could actually do, especially because you might have a strength limitation or something like that. So that's where the advent, the original intent, the original purpose of the stabilizing brace came from. Because federal government decided that this is a pistol, doesn't have a stock on it. And again, you can imagine, especially if you're, wounded in combat or have strength or mobility limitations or otherwise potentially disabled, you can imagine shooting this one-handed, as the law helps identify what a pistol is. This could be kind of heavy, and this doesn't even have optics, IR laser, anything on it. So that's where the stabilizing brace came from, where you could strap it to your forearm and actually shoot that one-handed as the law prescribes. So that's kind of where it started. And this is going to be an important component to the rest of the conversation or later down the road. But this has been a thing legally through the ATF's determinations and, through the ATF's blessings. This has legally been a thing for, now we're going on 11 years, that pistol braces and the things like that have been totally legal. And if you are to put a pistol brace, now this is a brace, stabilizing brace. This is not a stock as defined by the ATF, or previously defined for the past 11 years. But if you're going to put this on what they determine to be a pistol, and you're trying to shoot it like a pistol, that does not constitute an unlawful or illegal SBR or short-barreled rifle. So just for those who don't know, giving you a little background on stabilizing braces and how long they've been around. So moving on, I remember back, it was like 2012, the first pistol braced firearm that I remember seeing, we received from distribution. It was a SIG 716 piston 308. It had like an 11 or 12-inch barrel, and it had one of the early brace designs on it. And even in California at the time, of course, it had a bullet button, which was legal at the time. But we were all kind of amazed because this was something that looked like an SBR, and in a banned state like California, you can't have NFA items. So to see that legally come in and us legally able to sell them, it was kind of a game changer. And again, that was at this point 11 years ago. But you know, the ATF has had some back and forth over the past 11 years about pistol braces. There was kind of the, hey, you can't, yes, you can shoulder it and it's not illegal. And then if you shoulder it, you are remanufacturing your pistol into an unlawful SBR right there on the moment at the range. And then, and I remember Tim from Military Arms Channel was the first gun tuber I saw to film himself during that ruling, shooting it from the shoulder purposefully with intent. And he just didn't care. He was like, this is bogus. I don't care. And through various other reasons, ATF had to back down, and they said, okay, if you spontaneously and sporadically shoulder a pistol braced with a stabilizing brace pistol to your shoulder, then that's not going to constitute you remanufacturing the gun into an unlawful SBR. And it was kind of back and forth. Late 2019, they changed how they were going to measure pistols and with regard to overall length and everything else. And it's kind of been back and forth. But where we are now is, at least Congress, in their own estimate, with the research they've done, it is estimated that 10 to 40 million Americans are in possession of or have pistol braces or these stabilizing braces and or braced firearms. So 10 to 40 million Americans have braced firearms or braces. And that's going to become relevant later. So moving on. Last year we had some concern, legitimate concern. ATF had a proposed rule change to mess with braces, try to regulate them. With the Q honey badger, they wanted samples. Looked like they were going to start the crackdown. There was over 200,000 comments in the proposed rule change. Over 200,000 of them were against the rule change. And part of that rule change was going to be the proposed, I'm sure some of you know or are aware of, the proposed ATF form 4999. This was going to be a worksheet where you could not score more than 3 points or 4 points. And you basically had to take your, despite ATF determination that these were not stocks, despite the ATF's determination that putting these stabilizing braces on your pistol builds, that these were not going to be determined to be unlawful SBRs, despite, basically 10 years of that, a decade of it. ATF was proposing 4999, which was going to be a worksheet that was going to say, basically, you got to take your build, how you built it or how you bought it, and you got to go through this worksheet, all these different steps. And if it amasses more than 3 or 4 points, then we will consider it an unlawful SBR. And basically, even the most mild pistol builds possible, we're going to rack up at least a dozen points. Like, it was impossible. So at least the good news is ATF in this recent ruling or rule change, 4999, the worksheet itself is gone. It's done. But some elements of it are still kind of in effect. So I'm going to pause with that and let's look at some of the live chat. Patriot says, I wonder what the compliance rate will be for the registry. We're going to get to that as well. Did you say 40 million braces? Yes, up to 40 million, at least according to congressional research on the topic. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but based on the various companies who have made stabilizing braces, and based on the major name brand companies who have offered pistols with braces on them out of the box from the factory, that is millions and millions of braces. That's a lot of Americans with braces, and that's not debatable. And I am a little bit under the weather. Been sick for the past week. I need something hot, and since I don't know, I guess we're talking about the ATF. Just need some Black Rifle coffee. It's Scapegoat medium roast. Just gotta make sure I just keep in mind the ATF while I'm talking about these things. I gotta try to work on my voice. Refreshing. So moving along, personal theory, and again, this is all my own conjecture and personal theory, but I think the ATF has always been against braces. They kind of basically allowed for braces to happen based on the intent of the product, like we talked about, for wounded warriors and disabled people, and to shoot their pistols as lawfully defined in a lawful manner, in a way that can allow them to shoot them effectually. And I think if you have a pistol braced AR, the bottom line is, not kidding anyone, just to be honest, the vast majority of us that have done pistol braces on what would otherwise be considered an SBR, had we put a stock on them, it allows us to basically have an SBR without a tax stamp, without going in the federal registry, and we can do interstate, travel. My ex-girlfriend lived in Texas, and being able to go to Texas, and take a short AR with me and not have to submit paperwork 2 months in advance just to travel across state lines with a very handy, AR pistol that both her and I could use if we needed it, was pretty handy. So I think the big thing is millions of Americans basically having an SBR, but not having a tax stamp and not being part of the registry and being able to travel across state lines with it without permission. I've always, even over a decade ago, I always thought ATF is not happy with this. So moving on, a little bit of very basic history of the 1934 National Firearms Act. And, having a history degree, being a history buff, I can tell you that history is not always pleasant, but it's our job to understand it and carry it. And it may ruffle some feathers with some people who don't know it, but I don't care. It's what happened. So moving to the history of the NFA, the biggest idea behind it is it happened because of gangster violence, Chicago, Al Capone, St. Valentine's Day Massacre, these gangsters that had machine guns, which, especially their Thompsons, they stole from the U.S. Navy. So these are guns that are already stolen, cutting off stocks and, barrels to have what was called whippet guns, and, all this gangster violence. It has to stop, which they didn't even have a business until alcohol was made illegal. So I'm not going to say it's the government creating a problem and creating more problems to find a solution. I'm just going to say this wasn't it, people. Going back to history, we didn't really see actual gun control until the wrong people started to try to tap into their Second Amendment rights. And post Civil War, after the Reconstruction Amendments, once we had freedmen, people had citizenship and everything else, and the wrong people started to try to tap into their Second Amendment rights, whether it was the African American community or immigrants. That's when gun control started to show up. And again, you don't have to like it. I don't like it, but it is our history. Gun control has a very, unfortunately, rich history with racism in our country. And being that it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Martin Luther King himself applied for concealed carry permits, and he was always denied because he wasn't the right kind of person to have a concealed carry permit. And not a lot of people know that. But then again, gun control these days, they can't really back it by racism anymore publicly. So it's for public safety is what it is now. And the 1934 NFA it moves into that territory. We don't want everybody, to access these kinds of firearms. And you better be rich and you better be known. Otherwise, no, it's not going to happen. Now, anyway, plowing ahead, why SBRs or short-barreled rifles, and why short-barreled shotguns, SBSs, why were they part of the 1934 National Firearms Act? Well, that's because originally pistols were going to be an NFA item. And they wanted to try to get ahead of some loopholes or people trying to make loopholes that they couldn't have legitimate pistols. So they would cut down rifles or shotguns to basically pistol size. So they included this SBR and SBS category. It's like, hey, if we're going to heavily regulate pistols, and then people are going to try to get around it with shotguns and rifles they cut down, well, then we're going to do this SBR, SBS category. And anything else that doesn't fit those parameters, we're going to include another category called AOW, or any other weapon. Now, towards the last minute of the passage of the 1934 NFA, pistols were actually removed from the NFA, not NFA items, but the SBRs, the SBSs, any other weapons, they stayed in the NFA, which is kind of curious. And for those who haven't seen it, I would recommend you to Forgotten Weapons with Ian McCullen, Gun Jesus, where he talks about the history of this. But I'll take a break real quick. Let's look at the comments. So let's see. Patriot is, I would probably get an SBR, but I'm honestly afraid of the bureaucracy. St. Valentine's Day Massacre fueled it, but later the NFA introduced typical by a Democrat. Maybe I'm wrong or getting it mixed up, though. Maybe we can answer those questions as we go. So long story short, NFA was not passed in good faith. Originally, and this is kind of the interesting thing, originally 18 inches was the minimum barrel length for both rifles and shotguns. And it stayed that way for many years. 1936, 22 rifle makers, they say, hey, this is 22 long rifle. This 18-inch barrel minimum is kind of overkill. These are not the guns that are allegedly used in crime. Can we get some kind of exemption? So in the 30s, they amend the law that rimfires can have a 16-inch barrel minimum requirement. And then we reach the 1960s, where something really interesting happened, which we're going to talk about when it comes to today. But the U.S. government was selling off all of these surplus M1 carbines, and they have a barrel less than 18 inches. And the government had went ahead, and no one realized it or caught on to it, but they had sold 300 to 400,000 surplus M1 carbines to the American public. But these carbines or rifles didn't have a barrel at least 18 inches. So now you had the government selling off, and they had already sold hundreds of thousands of M1 carbines to the public, and each and every one of those was an NFA violation because it wasn't a 22 rifle and the barrel was not 18 inches. So in the 1968 Gun Control Act, the last time the 1934 NFA was amended or changed, you basically had the government saying, hey, our bad, sorry, we sold all these M1 carbines. They don't have an 18-inch barrel. It's kind of after the fact now. We're going to change the barrel length to, at least for rifles, centerfire, and rimfire, it's all going to be 16-inch minimum barrel length, and therefore making the M1 carbines legal. And that's what they did. So let's keep that in mind. And it's interesting how in the 60s, with only 300 to 400,000 particular M1 carbines that were sold off to the public, and they didn't meet the NFA. Government had made a mistake. But in the 60s, their approach was to amend the NFA to allow for 16-inch barrel minimum, and everything was all good. Interesting how we contrast that with what we see now, that an accessory that was legal for the past 11 years that has 10 to 40 million Americans in possession of, instead of, hey, my bad, sorry, we're just going to amend the law to make sure you're cool. Instead of the 1960s approach for 300 to 400,000 people, for 10 to 40 million people over the past 11 years, they're going to double down. And that's something to think about. We're going to touch on that again. So real quick before I move on to the next thing. All right, the chat is still the same. Good. Moving on to the next thing. So in general, just a real quick, just how laws should be. There's kind of a concept, at least in our country, United States, with our nation of laws and our Constitution, how laws should be and how they should not be. And real quick, I do recommend this book. This is by Canterbury Classics or Canterbury Press out of San Diego. But this is the U.S. Constitution and other writings. So it goes from the Mayflower Compact to the Gettysburg Address to the Federalist Papers to our Constitution. This kind of gives you, if you read this and get it, this kind of gives you an idea of where does our law come from. And it didn't just start in 1775 or 1776 once we actually declared ourselves independent, or the 1780s once we earned that and created our own country. But there's kind of a backlog of where our laws come from. So this isn't just me having an opinion necessarily. This comes from somewhere, for those who don't know. But laws, what they should be and what they shouldn't be. What they should be, first of all, through our country and our Constitution, Article 1, the Constitution, that is the legislative branch. Congress is the House and the Senate. They are the only branch of government who can actually write the law and actually create legislation. They are the legislative branch. They are our legislators. They're the only ones who can actually write the law. And if it gets the same version of it gets passed in the House and the Senate and moves up to the executive or president, they can sign it and then it becomes law. But actually writing the law, and these are things you can and cannot do. These are things that carry criminal and financial, legal, consequence if you disobey or break these laws. The only people who can write the law that carry these kinds of consequences is our legislative branch. That is it. So that's what, at least in our country, step one, what a law should be. Should only be written by our Congress. Next, our Congress, of course, with the House and our Senate, they are elected officials. We elect them in this constitutional republic. They represent us. We elect them, and we send them to the federal government in Washington, D.C. to create these laws and vote on them if they're going to make it up to the executive to actually be signed into law. So, in other words, um, we have a representative system where we have a part or a say in electing the people who are going to write the laws, and they are the only people or branch of government who can do so. That's what laws should be. Also, what a law should be is it should be openly accessible and obtainable to the public. So you should be able to look at it anytime you want to and see what is there. Ideally, in most of our Congress, they used to be attorneys and lawyers and things. So there is a lot of legal when you actually get down through the weeds of different laws and statute, but it should be relatively clear and concise to your layman, your average citizen. It's open, it's obtainable. We elected the people who helped to write it. It got approved through our Constitution with the executive. It became law, and we can understand it. It is clear and concise. It makes sense. Okay, I understand it. And, if you're a law-abiding citizen in a country or society like ours, then we should know the law and, make every effort to obey it and not try to break it intentionally. But it's also the government's duty to make it transparent, to keep in accordance with our Constitution, and to make it something that is openly accessible, that we all understand, that we had a part in helping pass this. Now, what laws should not be, they should not be purposely ambiguous, and that's something the ATF has been accused of, something they've definitely done, in my opinion, over the years and decades, that they purposely change rules or do things to be ambiguous, where, if anyone wants to roll the dice, they could say, well, under a gracious interpretation of what's here, what I'm doing should be legal, but under a adversarial interpretation, I guess they could say I'm breaking the law. And purposely ambiguous laws should not be. It should be very clear, black and white on paper. This is the deal. So to purposely make things kind of wishy-washy and make people wonder if what they're doing is legal or not, and they don't even know, their lawyer doesn't even know, and we'll just figure that out if you get arrested and if and when it goes to court and it doesn't end up with a plea deal. That's not how things should be. The laws, what they shouldn't be also is just changeable at random or ever changing. That it takes a intentionally long and purposeful process to write and approve and pass these laws and send them up to the president to sign, that they become law. And what laws should not be is just kind of, you wake up one day and boom, everything is totally different without that constitutional process. That's not what laws should be. They should not be difficult to understand or keep up with. It should be published and here it is, versus, hey, we're going to do something because we feel like it, and we're purposely not giving you the left and right limits. We're just going to throw something out there and, do what you will. Prison's not cool. So it shouldn't be difficult to understand or keep up with. Definitely, laws should not be at the mercy of, the ebb and flow and the changes. It shouldn't be up to unelected people who are not, well, elected, but they're not representatives. We didn't vote for them. They're not even part of Congress. They're a subshoot of the DOJ, which is part of the executive branch, separation of powers. So what the law should not be is just up to people who were not elected to change their opinion and just kind of do whatever. And all of a sudden it changes everything the next day. And there was no constitutional process. That's, at least in our country, it's not what laws should be. And it should not be on top of that, all of that. It should not be up to the whims of whatever presidential administration happens to be in power or whatever political party happens to be in power. It shouldn't be up to the ebb and flow of public opinion or political opinion. It should be a constitutional process. And overall, that's kind of my personal, ideas of what laws should be and what they shouldn't be. And again, for those who missed it, this happens to be one outstanding book, U.S. Constitution, Other Writings. I'm not sponsored by them, by the way. But if you really read through this, dating back to the 17th century, some of the laws in here and different compacts and things, we come from somewhere, and this is an eventual gradual evolution of legal precedent and common law. So this doesn't just show up because of the American Revolution. So that's what laws should be and should not be. Anyway, before we get to the next point, just going to catch up on the chat here. Are you familiar with the Stephen Holbrook and his books, That Every Man Be Armed and Founders, Second Amendment? I've not read them, but I have heard about them. And I think after this, people might run to the books like that or ideas like that. Okay. So the next thing, this rule change is called ATF 2021R-08F. And the actual link for the actual 293 pages of this is actually in the description of the video. So if you want to nerd out and you actually want to look at the rule change itself from the ATF, it is in the description, and you can see all 293 pages of stuff. But that's what it's called. So doesn't appear that it bans stabilizing braces by themselves. And it doesn't appear that it bans AR, AK, or some other pistols by themselves. But combining the two, or affixing that to your pistol, a stabilizing brace to your pistol, that's when it becomes an issue. And it's kind of wishy-washy. There's some things that are very specific. There are other things that are, in my opinion, purposely ambiguous. But one of the bigger things for me is it adds language to the 27 CFR, or Code of Federal Regulations, section 478.11. So this is the original ATF describing what a rifle is, and they just went ahead and added more than basically tripled what was already there and just added a bunch of stuff to it on their own. Now, again, they're not Congress. We did not elect them. This is not a constitutional process. And now they are essentially changing the law based on their current whims. We've already talked about how I'm not with that. So it's basically the overall theme of this whole thing is it seems like anything, especially that has surface area, that helps or aids in the shouldering of a pistol becomes an issue. And especially if we're talking about optics that require a short eye relief, so you basically have to shoulder it to see the reticle and properly use the optic. If you've got that optic on this pistol, whether it has a brace or not, this could be an issue. And page 10 of it, it basically references criteria for what they would consider. So again, the ATF form 4999 is gone, but the concepts from it or the spirit of it is still here. And I'm not going to read that verbatim, and I got it pulled up here, but again, it's page 10 of the rule change, which again is in the description down below. But it goes over, it's talking about, you know, if it has a weight or length consistent with the weight or length of similarly designed rifles, whether it has a length of pole. They talk about if it's equipped with sights or a scope, where the eye relief matters. Surface area, that's point number 4. And then this is kind of an interesting one. Um, haven't really seen this before. And this one I will read verbatim. It's one sentence, but point number 5 on page 11 says the manufacturer's direct and indirect marketing. So what does that even mean? Indirect marketing, is that just YouTubers filming themselves using a product, or are we talking about direct marketing? The manufacturer's direct and indirect marketing and promotional materials indicating the intended use of the weapon. Okay. Now, the last point is kind of the catch-all, at least in a different statute and laws. This, to me, looks like an obvious catch-all, where, the previous 5 points, if your pistol, didn't make the cut and we would not consider it an unlawful SBR by this point. Well, now there's point number 6, which is information demonstrating the likely use of the weapon in the general community. What does that mean? Information demonstrating the likely use of the weapon in the general community. I don't, what does that mean? So it's, again, I don't think laws should be made in a congressional process by our Constitution. They should not be made by unelected officials. It should not be on the whims of politics or presidential administrations or some executive branch bureaucracy doing their own thing, recodifying or adding to the law because they can't make the law. They're not supposed to. And now it's like, well, if we didn't nab you by our 5 points, then we're just going to say we're looking for information out there in the community. It's like, what is that? How is any reasonable person or law-abiding citizen supposed to know what in the hell that even means? What they're going to use or not use to determine if your pistol, with or without a brace, is actually an SBR. So next, we're going to talk about, when does this go into effect? So it was published several days ago. It will get entered into the National Registry sometime this week, probably tomorrow because today is a holiday, but sometime this week. And basically what it says is you have, 120 days. So I'll just say, if you have a pistol by itself that you're not sure about, or you have a stabilizing brace, which is kind of in the crosshairs here, and if you were to supposedly attach them like this, and now you have, in this case, an AR pistol with a stabilizing brace and a barrel less than 16 inches shooting a rifle caliber, what are we supposed to do? So if you had something like this, once it gets posted this week in the National Registry, we all have 120 days to remedy the problem. And I got to tell you, the options are not great, as you would imagine, or some of you already know. For those of you who are FFLs, federal firearms licensees, or you work in a gun shop, you have an FFL, you actually need to you got to hit the ground running right now. You got 60 days, and there's only certain things you can do with existing inventory, and I'm not going to get into that. I think most people watching now, most people who are going to watch this, they're not FFLs, they're just individual citizens like me. So, but for FFLs, you got to start hitting the ground running. And I would advise to do that like now or tomorrow morning when you open. But the really fun, awesome ways to make your firearm or make it compliant or to avoid having any kind of legal or criminal ramifications from a law that's not actually law. It's just an opinion, a rule change that carries the force of law, but we didn't elect these people and it's not a constitutional process. But things that we can do. First of all, the ATF says, well, hey, if you got a problem and you got something that's liable to be a felony possession in 120 days, option one is you can destroy it. Well, I'm not sure if they understand their audience, but as Americans, as law-abiding, liberty-conscious, constitutional Americans, we don't willfully destroy our own firearms. So let's go ahead and say no to that. I don't know anyone who would destroy their own firearms. That is out of control. Option two, surrender it to the ATF. The answer is no. I feel like I need some coffee again. My throat, it's just been talking a little bit too much, but surrender it to the ATF. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's as an American, it's against my, religion. I can't. No. And on a serious note, for those who may not be as hardline as me, who are watching or will see this later, if you have something in your possession that the federal government is going, or it's enacted and within 120 days it's going to be a felony possession, do you really want to take this thing that is going or is a felony and show up or call the government to come to your house, or you take time out of your day to go to them possessing what they consider a felony to go turn it in? In what universe does that make any goddamn sense? So moving along, option three, you can submit the exact and individual firearm for ATF determination. And whether this is showing up at a field office or photographing potentially what could be a felony and then sending it to the ATF for them to decide if you can have it or not while you already possess it. And then they're going to decide if it's an unlawful, illegal SBR or if it's totally legal as a pistol. Why would you do that? You potentially, because if they determine that what you have is illegal, then they're going to want it. They're going to come get it or make you turn it in or want you to turn it in. Or, it's like, why? No, we're not doing that either. But also a point on that is if you are a goody two shoes and you just got to make sure that what you have, you think it's legal, but this rule change is purposely ambiguous, like we talked about. So you send pictures to the ATF and just say, hey, Daddy ATF, what I already possess, which could be a felony, is this legal? Do we really think that's a good idea? Because if they say it's not good, they're going to want it, or you're going to be in possession of a felony. Or if they say it's cool, well, then that specific as photographed with every accessory as depicted must stay the same. And if you change anything on it as depicted, then it would need a whole new determination. So if you do get the green light, if you choose to do that, you can't change anything. If you change anything on the gun, it's a whole different gun. And then you got to resubmit so I think option number three is out as well. Option four, put a longer barrel on it. So maybe it's a AR pistol with a 10.3-inch barrel, maybe something like this. And you just, to make it compliant, you basically turn it into an actual rifle with a 16-inch or greater barrel length. The answer is also no, because, again, the past 11 years, this has been cool. But also, what if you have a wife, girlfriend, someone like that, this is by the bedside, it's lighter weight, it's more handy, it's more portable for confined spaces and home defense. And instead of this huge 16-inch heavier gun that does not work well in corners and hallways, and maybe this is the best thing, of course, with an optic weapon like sling. But maybe something like this has been your home defense solution for you and your spouse or girlfriend, whatever, for the past 11 years. And you're not going to want to put a rifle on it. You did this whole brace thing because you wanted something more manageable, something that would level the playing field. So why would I put a 16-inch barrel on something I purposely bought or built, to basically be something effective for, me and my partner, in the home? So no, that's the least abrasive option so far, but still no. Option 5, register it, and for this time only, tax-free, register it as an SBR. So the idea is, if you have something like that, then they say, hey, we're going to give you amnesty, we're going to cut you a break, and we're not going to charge you $200, and you can just register it as an SBR. Okay, so tell me that you want more people in the registry without telling me you want more people in the registry. Okay, you're going to cut me a $200 break, so I don't have to pay $200 to access my Bill of Rights. And for this one-time only deal, you're going to let me do it for free if I self-report and enter into your clown registry. That's the deal? Yeah, I don't think so. And again, this could come with the baggage of, you may have to submit proof that you owned it prior to January 13th of this year. You may have to submit photographs of whether they're going to consider a felony. Do we really want to do that? Not me. Another thing too, for those who have suppressors, SBRs, machine guns, destructive devices, AOWs, like anyone who has NFA stuff or has gone through getting a tax stamp, the weight is already bad. I mean, it's not good, it's bad. I mean, we're talking 8 months for a Form 4 suppressor. We were talking about a month and a half for an e-file Form 1 to create, manufacture an SBR. With all of these goody two-shoes who are going to jump in and try to take advantage of this, to tax-free, tax stamp, don't have to pay the $200. You're going to have some people who are nervous and they just want to register it and no questions asked. And then you're going to have a bunch of people that are going to be like, yeah, I have like 10 lowers that I eventually was going to SBR one at a time over the next 5 years. But you know what? I'm going to jump on this. So an already slow and inefficient system for processing your tax stamps, what do you think that's going to look like in the next 120 days when they get completely inundated with all of these requests and paperwork and everything for tax stamps? It's going to crash. Like the e-file system last year when it rolled out, it already crashed many times. This is already going to be a mess. So what maybe, if you're lucky, takes a month and a half to e-file a Form 1 to make an SBR, this could take like a year and a half. So, an already overburdened, stupid, and inefficient government system to process this paperwork and issue tax stamps. What do you think that's going to look like in the coming months? It's going to be out of control. So the next thing I have is concerns. If you haven't already picked up on some of my concerns. Number one is like panic purchasers. So during COVID, after George Floyd, the riots, everything, we had every walk of life, every person of every ethnicity and profession, and everyone you could possibly imagine coming in to buy guns. And, again, stabilizing braces have been legal as per ATF for the past 11 years prior to this. And we're not talking about small garage companies. We're talking about Daniel Defense, Springfield Armory, 6 Hour. We've got some big name manufacturers that for years have been offering AR pistols and things that already have a brace on them from the factory out of the box. And these are people who came in, they rushed to panic buy a firearm. Husband and wife team, they decided as a couple, we're going to finally buy a gun and we need something that's going to work for both of us. And they settle on this AR pistol that has a brace out of the factory box. They do a background check, 4473 paperwork. They've got a receipt. They've got an invoice. They purchased this legally in 2021 or 2022, whatever. And maybe they shot it once or twice, threw it in the closet, forgot about it. These people who are not up to date, they're not part of the gun culture, they're not really aware of random changes like this that pull the rug out from under you, they unknowingly will be in possession of a felony possession. That's 10 years in prison, up to $250,000 fine for having a gun that they purchased legally with a background check and a receipt and an invoice that everything was legal. So that's a concern that I have. And again, it goes to the tens of millions of citizens over the past 11 years that have bought braces and built their own ARs and bought firearms that came equipped with braces. Again, the estimate is 10 to 40 million braces and or braced firearms that are out there in the American public. And a lot of these people, they may not even know that the ATF, as of the 13th, decided they're going to change their mind after 11 years. And it's going to be, they've got to take those steps or else, it's like, I don't believe that's fair. I don't believe that's right. Another concern I have is essentially this is creating millions of felons, for the people who panicked bought or the people who change hobbies every 2 years and they were really into guns and bought a bunch of braced guns and now they're into boats or cars, whatever. And 10 years later, they decide to finally go shoot their guns again. And they have no idea that the stuff they legally bought 10 years ago is now a felony. But we're basically, through this rule change, you're taking otherwise law-abiding citizens who don't want to hurt people. They don't want violence. They obey the law. They just want to live their lives. They pay their taxes. Good people. They're not drug dealers. They don't have a meth lab in their house. They're not human trafficking. They're not gun running. They're not actual criminals. And overnight, and within the next 120 plus days, you're taking millions of good law-abiding people and turning them into felons for something they legally purchased. Again, I don't think that's right. I don't think it should happen. And I think the ATF, and this, in my opinion, this is a big if, but if the ATF should even exist, I would want the ATF to focus on drug dealers and actual criminals, gun runners, not muscling FFLs into purposely selling guns to felons and drug runners and gun runners to send them south of the border like Fast and Furious, but the actual gun runners, drug dealers, people who like the Boston bombers and domestic terrorists, like the actual criminals who really want to hurt people and are purposely actually breaking law to victimize people. If we're going to have an ATF, that's what I want the ATF to be focused on. All of their resources focus on the criminals, the domestic terrorists, the bombers, people doing awful things, breaking the law, actual violent crime. That's if we're going to have an ATF, that's what I want them focused on. Not, hey, is that a pistol brace or a stock? Or hey, I gotta measure a barrel real quick. Or hey, I gotta process hundreds of thousands of forms to issue a tax stamp so you can access your Bill of Rights, if we say so. That's not what I want. If again we're going to have an ATF, I don't want them focused on that crap. I want them focused on actual criminals. So now the last thing I'll say on my concerns category is, having lived in California for a number of years in the past and knowing what it's like to live in a banned state, my concern is for banned state people, that there are definitely California, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maryland, New Jersey, New York. You've got these different states, Hawaii, where in some of these states, the only reason legally that they can have a certain pistol or firearm is because of the brace. And if the brace becomes an issue, what are they supposed to do? Well, looking through this new rule change, ATF doesn't care. They don't make any mention of it. It's just, they just don't care. So, for those of us in NFA states where you can have suppressors and SBRs and machine guns and stuff, it's already bad enough. But what about the law-abiding pro-Second Amendment gun-owning people in banned states where kind of having a brace on a firearm is the only reason it made it legal, that they could still have it, and now that's being taken away? And what are they supposed to do? Well, there's no remedy, and there's no apparent concern or care for those people at all. It's just kind of, well, good luck. And again, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's right, at least coming from a federal level. So I've already kind of talked about this, but whether you own guns or not, maybe someone watching this, you don't even own any guns, or maybe you own a couple guns just for hunting, whatever. You don't even have an AR, whatever the case. Whoever you are, I think all Americans should be concerned about these two big points. One is a bureaucracy subshoot of the DOJ, which is part of the executive branch, just a bureaucracy of our government effectually changing their mind. And that's, being a one-man Congress, basically. But them changing their mind and publishing an opinion carries the force of law. That these are real felonies, these are real years in prison, these are real fines, and innocent everyday Americans who purchase things legally, and they're all about doing things legally. Some bureaucracy that was not elected, not through a constitutional process, and only through an opinion change, that opinion carries the force of law and puts people in a cage. That's a problem. And whether you own guns or not, this should not be happening. The next thing, like I said, is because of that, you've got millions of law-abiding Americans trying to do the right thing and thinking they have been doing the right thing. And all of a sudden, they're just turned into felons overnight. And the cherry on top is the real criminals, the real felons, the real evil people and domestic terrorists, the real gangbangers and people out. They don't care. They don't care. So who is this really affecting? What is this really designed to do? Are the questions I would say we should be asking. So now we move into some personal theories as to why is this happening and why now. So potential theory, and this one actually comes from, his name is Fudbusters on YouTube. He is an actual lawyer, deals with Second Amendment case law. But a potential idea, and that's also in the description if you want to see his 2.5-hour live stream. But a potential idea is, the ATF went so overboard and went so unreasonable and a very clear overreach of government authority where it doesn't even exist, that they only did this because possibly they had conversation or agreement with either the Supreme Court or some other faction in the government that they were not going to touch the NFA. And it's been a hot minute since the Miller case in the 30s. It's been a while since the Supreme Court has addressed the NFA specifically itself. So, potential idea number one is ATF knew this was wild and crazy and huge and overreaching, but they had assurances that it would not be messed with. So they were able to be that bold and just go for it. Personally, I don't really buy into that. I guess it's on the board. Next theory is, especially after Bruin and the Chevron deference case we had as well last year at the Supreme Court, that ATF knows their power is kind of weakening and their ability to do these kinds of things. Eventually, the writing's on the wall, and this is not going to work, especially with current composition of the Supreme Court for the foreseeable future. So it was kind of like their last gasp of just Hail Mary, just throw it all at the wall and see what sticks. So that's, a possible theory that why it happened. Also, it could be just between the proposed rule change of last year and how this has been kind of a process, that this is just kind of the timing. Government works slowly and it goes on its own time. So maybe the timing of this just kind of is what it is. Who knows? But my expected outcomes, at least where is this going to go? We know for fact that GOA, Gun Owners of America, the Firearms Policy Coalition, the Second Amendment Foundation, and a myriad of other pro-Second Amendment organizations that do have legal teams of Second Amendment lawyers, that they will be filing lawsuits. They're working on them, I'm sure, right now as we speak, trying to make the most intellectual and best arguments possible. And I think between now and 120 days or 120 plus days, it's relatively likely there might be a stay on this. There might be an injunction. There might be a temporary order to pause it until litigation. So that kind of leads me to, what is going to happen with this. I think I'll leave that probably towards the end. But one thing I'll say, though, beyond that is kind of my hopes and dreams. And just looking at the chat, this is actually right on target with that. But my hopes and dreams, where this could go. So we're kind of in an interesting situation if you really think about it. So what the ATF is saying in this recent rule change that's going to go in the Federal Registry sometime this week, and then 120 days to comply with those terrible options. But what the ATF is saying through all this is they basically consider AR, AK pistols, any pistols with some kind of stabilizing brace that, again, has been cool and totally legal by their blessing the last 11 years. But what they're saying is those things are now what they're going to consider illegal, unregistered SBRs, short-barreled rifles. And again, that could be up to 10 to 40 million people with that. So basically, they're saying, we have what the ATF is now considering unlawful SBRs, again, 10 to 40 million people. And then we do actually have the registry of legitimate registered SBRs and SBSs, which is also in the millions. So you have tens of millions of firearms and people who possess and own them, who are either pistol braced and considered unlawful SBRs anyway, and then you have the actual registry of people who registered and did it, you've got tens of millions of people who have these things now. What does that mean for me? Well, the argument is getting to, is that not common use? And for those who know, I'm talking about the 2008 Heller versus DC decision, where the Supreme Court ruled that you cannot ban something that's in common use. So between what they're considering illegal SBRs in 10 to 40 million, and then all the people who actually have registered SBRs, how many, what's the number to consider what constitutes common use? So the hope would be that it can make it to the courts and they can just determine, hey, we've got 40 million plus what you consider illegal SBRs and the actual registered SBRs. At this point, this is common use. You can't heavily regulate this anymore. This is common use items, So I hope for that. And then we get to like the whole dangerous and unusual thing, which is also from Heller and elsewhere. By the FBI crime report, which they publish annually, we can easily tell that guns that have braces on them are not, in the past 11 years, we haven't had this explosion of crime or gun violence, perpetrated by things that have braces on them. We can tell that by the numbers, and we know that. So are they extraordinarily dangerous and crazy compared to anything else? No. Are they unusual? Well, if there's 40, 50 plus million people that have them, they're definitely not unusual. In fact, common use comes to mind. So, if the government can't justify that they're dangerous or unusual, then they can't ban it. Plus the Bruin decision from last year, that the two-step process of, hey, this can violate the hell out of the Constitution, but if we can fall back to, hey, this is for public safety, then the ban or restriction can fly. Well, that's not a thing. This needs to be within the history, text, and tradition of the Second Amendment, or else it's unconstitutional. You can't have this ban. So I don't see the ATF winning on the common use or the dangerous and unusual, and especially their justifications about the community standards or public safety that we see in this rule change. Well, that's not even relevant. That's immaterial, legally speaking. After the Bruin decision, it's not going to stand up in court. So that's kind of some hopes and dreams. I admit the full bias that, in my ideal world, I want to see the NFA completely just repealed entirely. Now, is that going to happen in one fell swoop? Probably realistically not. We may have to do what, the gun control lobby has done for decades, unfortunately, successfully, and kind of what they've proven to be the winning tactic is to chip away at things over time and slowly erode things over time. And maybe we have to do that as well when it comes to the NFA and other restrictions, where we can't just bite off all this that we could chew and hope it all goes down in one night. We may have to chip away at this. And when it comes to this particular rule change, for starters on the NFA, I would like to see SBRs, SBSs, and AOWs, so short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, any other weapons. At this point, with 11 years of braces and how many people have them and how many actual registered items there are, the cat's out of the bag. This is so common. They're not particularly exceptionally dangerous, and they're very usual. I would love to see those just deregulated, taken out of the NFA, and not by an opinion, not by a Supreme Court decision by itself, but an actual change in the law, because I still believe in the constitutional process. And, we make and change law through Congress. That's what I would like to see. But I would like to see those things deregulated for starters, especially after this decision. you know, at least not being a lawyer, but it looks like they left the door wide open for some very enterprising pro Second Amendment groups and legal teams to make some very interesting cases here. Um, one of the last things we'll talk about here is unintended consequences. So the ATF clearly, has its motive and its mission about pistol stabilizing braces and looking at them as SBRs. But there are some unintended consequences or some blowback that happen from doing stuff like this. So, like we talked about, I think thing number one is an already overburdened and inefficient system in processing forms and issuing tax stamps. Well, that's about to be just totally flooded and it's going to crash and crash again. I think the next thing is, when you make laws that are not clear, they're not concise, they're disturbingly complex, purposely ambiguous, not passed in good faith, or you make a rule change that carries the force of law that does all of that. Um, the unintended consequences are you just have regular everyday Americans who, first of all, if they even know about it, that the thing they legally purchased a year or two ago or within the past 11 years, all of a sudden that's illegal and a felony possession. So even if they even know about it, but if they do know about it, it's like, hey, it's going to be a felony for me to have this pistol brace on my gun, but then it's also the same penalty of felony to have a stock on it. Well, then screw this pistol brace. I'm going to go buy a stock and just put it on and just live my life. So if you make laws that are intentionally ambiguous, very complex, the penalty for doing what was previously illegal is the same penalty as doing something that was already illegal, you're going to have a lot of people that are just going to say, you know what? I don't care anymore. Like, fine, I'll just take this brace off, throw a stock on it, and I don't care. Like, if it's a felony either way, I'm not destroying my guns. I'm not giving up my guns. I'm not putting a 16-inch barrel on it. Like, if the consequence is the same with a brace or a stock, we're putting a stock on. You're going to have a lot of people doing that. And I've actually, in the past several years, I've already seen that with people showing up at the gun shop, on the gun range. They've got stocks on, a rifle that has less than 16-inch barrel. It's like, oh, that could be an SBR, or that could be someone who just gave up and doesn't care anymore. Gave up trying to understand the ebb and flow of these rule changes and whatever. They don't care anymore. So that's something, that's an unintended consequence. Another unintended consequence is we've already had, I believe it was either one of the Carolinas or Tennessee. We already have at least one state that specifically last year or the year before passed a law where the state is not going after SBRs. They just don't care anymore. So especially after this rule change, the people of that state just throwing stocks on everything and just not caring because their state officials, their local law enforcement, their state law enforcement and prosecutor's office, they're not going after SBRs anymore. So another unintended consequence, besides what we've already seen with sanctuary counties, Second Amendment sanctuary cities, sheriffs, and people just saying, I'm not enforcing that, and people just kind of bucking the system anyway. Another unintended consequence for the ATF is you might actually have states start to look at that seriously and say, you know what, we've received so many letters from our constituents about this crazy thing. We're going to move to pass a state law and enact it through the governor that we don't care about SBRs anymore, and we're not going to enforce it. So that could also be a consequence that they're not expecting or anticipating. Now I've got my last thing, but before I get to that, I'll catch up with the comments here. Let's see. I really hope the NFA and other gun laws will be repealed someday. We've been having some victories lately despite the ATF. Yes, we have, especially the Bruin decision, I think is one of the biggest things that has definitely happened in recent memory. I would like to get an actual machine gun someday without all the bureaucracy. Yeah, I mean that would be cool. Again, I admit that my ultimate hope and dream and goal is just the NFA completely repealed, goes away. So maybe that could happen legally. But the last thing that I have on my notes is two things. First of all, so what do we do now in the face of everything that I've said during this live stream and this proposed rule change, which is supposed to be on the registry sometime this week? And then we've got 120 plus days to figure out a solution that none of it is cool. But in the face of this, what do we do now? So I would say, and again, not a lawyer. This is not competent legal advice. This is all opinion and for entertainment. But thing number one, I'd say is, not to do anything rash or crazy right now. We do have, like I said, between different Second Amendment organizations with very competent legal teams, we do have lawsuits that are about to, it's about to hit the fan for the ATF. And 120 days from now, is this even still going to be a thing? Is there going to be so much litigation and pressure that they're going to have a stay on it? There's going to be a restraining order on it, and an injunction or pause. Is the ATF, which we have seen in the past, actually, recent years, is the ATF going to have to just ball it up and cancel it and go home because it's just not worth it anymore? So, there's a lot that not just can, but is going to happen in the next 120 days. So step one, I wouldn't do anything rash or crazy right now. I wouldn't go out there and try to be a goody two shoes and e-file trying to jump on this free tax stamp train. Wouldn't do that. Would not destroy your guns, would not submit your guns to the ATF or surrender them. And I would just keep living life. Wouldn't do anything crazy or extreme. Just hang back and, like me, see what happens. Probably in the next month or two is where we're going to see a lot of action on this. So I would probably hang back and just wait for now, at least for now, because again, this hasn't even entered the Federal Registry yet. It will this week, pretty certain of that. But we have 120 days, a pretty long time. That's a lot of time for a lot of stuff to happen. So I wouldn't go out there and do anything crazy. I would just keep on keeping on and keep a watch on this. And again, the next month or two is probably when we're going to get a more refined, realistic idea as to where this is heading and if it's actually going to make it and what's happening. And then the second thing is, to the do not comply crowd, which I have a lot of you guys, and there's a lot of Americans like that, where it's like, what, I don't care, just do not comply. As an American, 100% get it. No judgment and no sadness or frustration with that, believe me. Whatever you do for the do not comply crowd, whatever you do in the privacy of your own home or your own workbench with your own legally acquired property is your business. So if you decide, what, I don't care anymore, I'm just throwing stocks on everything, forget these braces, I'm throwing them in the garbage, I'm putting stocks on everything. Whatever you do with your own lawfully acquired property inside your own home, and that's all your own business, and that's on you. The laws are what they are, and it is what it is. But we're all grown ups, and we can all decide thank God for this country as Americans. So we can decide our own path of how we want to proceed and what we want to do. So whatever you do, whatever, builds or, combinations of parts and things you decide to do in your own home, that's on you. And there's no judgment, anything, that's all on you. And honestly, just getting real, like, unless you've got warrants or you have a meth lab in your basement, or you're doing some serious crime and you're on the radar of law enforcement or the ATF or the FBI, or you have some huge overreaching reason why law enforcement is wanting to bust into your house or obtain a warrant. If you're a law-abiding citizen and you're doing your own thing and paying your taxes, going to work, just living your life, whatever you do in the privacy of your home with your guns is whatever. And just, shut the hell up. Don't make a big deal about it. Don't, make all this fanfare and stuff about it. Just whatever you do is what you do. So at least for now, that's kind of where we're at on what do we do now. And for fellow patriots who are the do not comply crowd, that's where we're at. So that is the end of my notes. That is the end of the, at least, information I have on this rule change that is supposed to start sometime this week. And again, it's 293 pages. I didn't want to go over every single page, and there are people who have done it. God bless them, actual lawyers and stuff, and live streamed, and it's very dry. I wanted to get to the point of the backstory on stabilizing braces, how we got here, what's happening now, and why this is an issue. So that's all I have to present. I'm going to leave, the comments open for a couple more minutes here for anyone who wants to ask. I guess we can consider this like a Q&A for anyone who wants to ask any questions, whether it's about this or other stuff. I've got about several minutes before I got to go, but I'll leave the floor to you guys. Again, I want to thank the ATF for just doing an awesome job with this ruling, or this change, rule change. Sorry, I just need that. Unrelated. But also want to thank you guys for all being here and watching the live stream, whether you were here in the moment or if you're watching this later. I do appreciate you guys being here. I'm sorry that I've been away for a little bit. Things have really been busy. But for anyone who has any further questions or any comments, I welcome them. So go ahead, drop a comment down below, whether you're watching this later, whatnot. But again, appreciate you guys all being here. Let's see. I remember over a year ago, the ATF allowed comments on this, then potential ruling. Did they even read the comments? Yeah, so that's coming from Patriots. So it was last year, it was a proposed rule change where they rolled out, hey, we're proposing on doing the ATF form 4999, this worksheet thing, and we're going to crack down on braces. And they did have an open, public comments period where anyone could submit comments in favor of or against this proposed rule change. I think there was 237,000, if memory serves, comments that were submitted. There were about 18,000 of those that were in favor of the rule, but they were all basically verbatim the same. There must have been, Every Town for Safety or Brady campaign. There must have been some gun control organization that drafted kind of like a copy and paste letter. So there was about 18,000 of those comments that were all the same, letter in favor of the regulations. And the rest of them were, against it. So it's it's interesting how when the ATF or another bureaucracy, if there's going to be a rule change, they do open a public comments period. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. Like with the green tip, how in recent years they've talked about banning green tip as armor piercing ammunition, which it's not. And there was such a flood of open comments against it, for the proposed rule change, that they just gave up and backed off. So sometimes that open comment period actually makes a pretty big difference. If we get engaged and we actually go out there and submit comments. In my personal experience, I think contacting your local elected officials as one of their constituents, whether it's your senators, your local congressmen. In years past, I used to send hundreds of letters all the time. And I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Phone calls, if you actually do a phone call to your senator or congressman or either of your senators, it's like one phone call is equivalent to like 300 letters, because there is some poor intern that has to pick up the phone and the conversation has to be recorded and what the issue is and if you're in favor of it or against it. And by law, that has to be recorded. Someone has to do that. And your congressmen or senators are going to see that eventually. So again, be cordial, respectful, nothing crazy. Just get to the point of the issue and you're against it. Here's why, done. But the phone calls for your local representatives seem to matter more than letters. Or, worst case scenario, you just, if you've got the money, just send 2,000 letters a week and just, that's not illegal to do. It's going to definitely get their attention. So that's something you can do. I'm going to take this last one. I'm going to have to go. There are lots of folks who want to abolish the ATF. I want to repeal the laws and then abolish the ATF. I'm terrified of the FBI enforcing gun laws. Yeah, at least, and this is all just personal opinion, but what the FBI, they've got a very interesting history, and without going into that and the Hoover days and everything, modern day post 9/11 and what the FBI does now, the FBI would not, first of all, would not really be in a position to enforce even federal gun laws, but also they're not interested in doing that. They don't have the people to do it. That's not what that agency is about. They would probably have zero interest in it. So I'm not worried about that. And like I said earlier in the live stream, if the ATF is going to exist, I want them to go after real criminals and gun runners and bombers and domestic terrorists and people who are actually criminals trying to do bad things. Messing around with storing so many 4473s and trying to process these forms for firearms that are not dangerous or unusual, and they're very common. I just see it as a complete waste. And, how many real criminals and real terrorists could the ATF be cracking down on and pursuing and prosecuting if they didn't have all of this crap that they are, siphoned off to have to deal with that shouldn't even be a thing anyway. So, if the ATF is still going to exist, like I said, I want them dealing with real stuff and not measuring barrels and looking at surface area on a pistol brace or whatever. It's ridiculous. So anyway, thank you all for being here. Glad you guys were watching. Anyone showing up and watching this later, thank you for being here and watching this as well. Again, publish or post any comments or questions you have down below. But I do appreciate all you guys being here, and hopefully with all the recent stuff going on, this helped a little bit, or at least shed some light on some things. Hopefully it's been a net positive for people. So, anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.